Hey guys, Spartan071 here from the Phoenix Fire Team, working on covering foam with epoxy resin with cold cast powder. Doing my best to describe the process I go through here. Might be a little muffled because I'm wearing a face mask. Something you definitely want to do when working with cold cast powder, as this stuff can be very dangerous if inhaled. So I've already got my two-part mixture measured out. I haven't mixed them yet, however I have mixed the powder in already. This is why this stuff looks dark gray. The idea behind this is that when it sets and it's polished, it will look metallic. So after I paint it and I go to weather it, I can scuff it down and it will be metallic underneath, like real weathering rather than painted on weathering. Also, this will give the foam helmet some rigidity and a little bit more strength. This is my helmet I'm working on, a Mark 5B from Reach. I've already sanded it down after a couple of coats to find the spots that need a little bit more resin filled in because they have gaps or holes or things like that. So I'm gonna get right to it and mix this stuff up and start painting it on, and you guys can see how I do it. Hopefully it'll be informative. So the stuff I'm using is called XTC 3D. It is an epoxy resin normally used for 3D prints to get out all the little grooves from the 3D print. The reason I'm using this instead of more conventional resins is because of the fact that it is designed as an adhesive, so it should bond to the foam very well versus a regular resin which might actually peel off or delaminate from the foam. So get that good and mixed up. Hopefully we don't have too many air bubbles in there, although it doesn't really matter when you're painting it on so much because they tend to come out anyway. So I'm using foam brushes, these guys, because they tend to go on fairly smooth and they soak up a little bit of the epoxy in there so I can actually have a little bit more to use at a time. Now I'm not going over the entire helmet with this one, just the trouble spots and spots where the foam became exposed from sanding. Now you want to lay this stuff on pretty thin. This is actually my fourth coat. However, this isn't a full coat. This is just kind of a spot coat to fill in some spots that I missed. Use this stuff in a well-ventilated area. While I didn't see anything about actually wearing a respirator, I usually do. Or at least a dust mask. I found that even though it doesn't say that there's anything to worry about inhalation wise, I get kind of a mild headache after using this stuff for a little bit. So I recommend using some type of protective gear for your face, especially breathing. This stuff does have a self-leveling quality to it, partly because of why it goes on so thick. Now it's not perfect. You're still going to have to do a little bit of sanding, which you're going to want to do anyway with this stuff because of the fact that you want it to look like metal. So you want to try and lay it on as evenly as possible. You don't want to leave any streaks or brush marks if you can avoid it. When you put on your first coat of this stuff onto foam, I tend to go very light with it and kind of massage it into the foam as I go. I don't sit there and just brush it on and leave it. I actually go over it several times with the brush to try and get it good and bonded with the foam. One of the issues I've noticed while doing this particular piece is that the craft foam, when sanded, rather than coming out smooth, tends to come out a little bit rough. Now I could probably fix that with some finer grained sandpaper. However, I'm not too worried about it as the resin should cover most of it up. As you can see, when I brush this stuff on, I tend to go over it several times. I don't just brush it on there real quick. That's part of that massaging bit I was talking about earlier. Also helps even it out all the way across the piece. You don't want this stuff to pool up, because then it's just more sanding in one particular area. And depending on what you're using to sand, if you're using a palm sander or something, you might actually have to worry about sanding other areas on accident while sanding that. So you want to spread this stuff out quite a bit. It goes on very thick, a little bit thinner than maybe toothpaste or molasses or syrup. So it may seem like it's really tacky already, but it has a pot life of about 10 minutes or so, which is usually enough to get a good thin coat across the entire helmet. Every now and then I might have to change out brushes midway through, because the brush gets soaked up and tacky and it's just not laying the stuff on smooth like it should anymore, because it's just saturated. Sometimes that happens. The last coat I didn't really have to. I think I might have changed brushes once. I don't really remember. But the thinner you lay it on, I think the longer the brush will last, because the less it gets into the actual brush. Now, one thing I did notice I did kind of wrong is I probably should have sanded this more as I went between coats, rather than laying a coat on, letting it sit, cure and all that, and then maybe throwing another coat on too quickly without sanding it. But that's fixable. Lay on some more and sand it down some more and lay on some more. So this really comes out to pretty close to the same amount of work as a regular paper Pepakura, I think. However, I find I hate working with the paper, all the little tabs and folding and bending and all that. So that part definitely still has more work to it. I also find that the foam, you don't have to put anywhere near as much resin on there in total, because you already have somewhat of a structure there, whereas the paper is very weak initially, and you have to put a lot of stuff on it in order to get it to hold its strength. And then you actually have to put the fiberglass matting in and things like that. And I used to work for an auto shop, and I found that I absolutely hate fiberglass with a passion. So I try to avoid it at all costs. Now, that may narrow out my skills a bit and my experience, but it just pushes me in other directions. So rather than sit there and do something that I absolutely loathe doing, I can learn how to do something else that gives me the same or similar effect, which I think is probably the better solution of the two. Okay, got a good thin even coat up there. Like I said, I'm also trying to fill in a few trouble spots I've had with this one, a few little gaps that come from not being as precise on the foam as I either could have been or might not have been. It's one of the tricky parts about foam, is that it can be difficult to be precise, because you're building a helmet or armor out of marshmallows is what I always equate it to, because the foam's so squishy. You're trying to cut it very precisely, and it doesn't always work out in your favor. So being precise is one of the downsides to using foam over paper, I guess. But I'll let you guys be the judge of that. Hopefully this one won't be as long as the last one. The last one came out to about 23 minutes, and my phone records in very, very high quality video apparently. So it took me forever to get it converted to a smaller size to actually upload, and because of that I lost quality. So I turned down the quality a little bit on my phone, hoping to get better quality in the long run with a smaller size file. So it won't take 2 hours to upload to YouTube or something like that. If I take this off screen, I'm sorry, sometimes it's a little bit easier to work with it off the bench when I'm doing the sides and a few other parts of it. So I'm going to try and keep this in view as much as I can. This is only my second video, so forgive me if it's not the best quality. Just trying to share what I know. When you mix this stuff up, also, very small batches. I mean, you can coat an entire helmet in a very, very small amount of resin. I mean, when I mix this up, if you look at the little tiny Dixie cups, the ones that are about the size of a shot glass, when I do a mixture to coat a helmet with one solid coat, I'm only filling each cup to the little tiny line at the very bottom, because that's all it takes. It takes very little of this stuff to coat the entire thing. A little bit goes a long way. So just some food for thought, so you're not wasting the resin or epoxy or whatever you're using, as the stuff can get expensive the more you use it. So let's see, I got a little spot right there. I want to put a dab in. There we go. If you put too much on a spot, don't worry about it too much, because you can always sand it down later. However, the better you do it the first time, the less you got to do it the second time. So, something else to keep in mind. Also, you don't want to get this stuff in your clothes. In your clothes is basically this stuff will become permanent addition to whatever you're wearing. So you might want to wear some, raggedy old clothes that you're not worried about destroying, or if you have work clothes, as I call them, or shop clothes, something like that. You're probably going to want to wear that. I've had a couple people ask me why I went ahead and mounted the visor now rather than wait until the helmet's completely done. Well, number one reason for that is when you're putting this stuff on, it makes the helmet a lot more rigid. Well, the visor actually helps the total shape of the helmet. If I took the visor out, the opening where the visor is tends to narrow up a lot, just because of the foam and the tension on it and things like that. And it's not a big deal, but having the visor in there keeps it where it's supposed to be. Now, this is a motorcycle visor that I heat formed in the oven to get it the proper curve that I needed, which is tricky, and I don't recommend doing it if you have an alternative solution. However, I like the results I get out of it. A lot of people can vacuum form. If you can, awesome. More power to you, and I plan on doing that soon. Actually talking with a friend of mine this weekend about building one. So, hopefully, on the next few builds, I won't even be using motorcycle visors anymore. I'll be using vacuum form visors. We'll see. Although I have to say, one of the problems I've come across is when building your own visors is chromium. I've looked up a lot of different ways to do it, and I haven't had much luck. Maybe just I'm doing it wrong or something like that. I don't know, but I have to do more research online about how to get that to work the way it should. Because most time, if I get a visor that looks good, I can't see through it. If I get a visor that I can see through, it doesn't look good. And as we all know, we want it to look good. Visibility is kind of important when you're walking around a con, and you don't want to be carrying your helmet all day. You'd be surprised the number of people that like to take photos without you even realizing it. So, that now like a certain degree of anonymity when I'm walking around. I don't know. Makes me feel good, I guess. Let's see. A few more spots here and there. Should be about finished up with this coat of resin. Or epoxy, technically, but trying to go back over a few areas and add a little bit more to it as the stuff soaks in, and make sure I get all the spots that I was saying before I had trouble with. Alright, that brush is starting to get a little messed up, so I'm switching out to a fresh brush. Notice as it soaks up the resin, the brush starts to stay squished, at least longer and longer. So, swap out every now and then. Got a big gap here from sanding. I'm going to try and lay it on a little thicker there. This stuff takes a while to cure. It's not like your standard resin where in 5 or 10 minutes the stuff is good to go to play with and sand and do other things. This stuff takes about an hour and a half to cure to the point where you can put another coat on, and about 3.5 hours before you can sand it. The stuff gets tacky for a very long time and stays that way for a very long time. I think part of that's because this is an epoxy, not a traditional resin. I don't know. I'm no expert, and I'm certainly no chemist. But if you use the same stuff I do, I like to put a coat on right before I go to bed. That way, it's done in the morning. I'm doing this one in the middle of the afternoon, though, because I'm hoping to get this thing prepped for painting this evening. However, I don't know if that's going to happen or not. We'll have to see what happens after this resin cures and take a look at it. So, hopefully. Fingers crossed and all that good stuff. Let's go back over a few more of these little trouble spots, and hopefully we can set this thing down and not touch it for a few hours. Depending on how this turns out, I'm not sure if I'm going to keep doing it this way or not. When we see the final product, then I'll make the decision on whether I want to keep trying this stuff. So far, I've really liked what I've gotten. I've done a few test pieces, and I've gotten good results out of it. However, I haven't done a full piece with the whole thing coated and painted and then weathered and everything else. So, we'll see. And that's one of the things about this is you're not going to see the fruits of your labor until it's done. I mean, you can get a decent idea as you go, but to really get an idea of how it's going to look, you're not going to know until the whole thing is painted, detailed, and then weathered. As you can see, I'm not coating the entire helmet with this stuff. I've left a few spots open to foam, and that is because I want parts of this helmet to still be flexible, as this helmet fits very snug on my head. It's not very loose. So I want a few spots to still be flexible so I can get my head in and out of it without cracking the resin. That is one thing about this stuff. You can still crack it, however, it is fairly resilient. So I like to leave flex points in the helmet where the foam can still move, so that when I put the helmet on, take it off, or whatever, it will have some give to it. Touch up this little spot here. I had a spot where I accidentally chipped the epoxy while I was sanding it. My sandpaper went into the foam underneath the epoxy and then kind of drove itself back out at another angle. Took a chip out of it, which kind of made me mad. Well, instead of just having a little spot to cover up and sand down and things like that, I have a spot I actually have to fill in, a little chunk missing. This stuff is starting to get a little tacky. This stuff does only have a pot life of about 10 minutes, like I said, so trying to finish up rather quickly and lay this stuff on thicker where I need it and leave it out. Sorry if I talk too much. Like I said, still new to making the videos thing, but hopefully it's a help. Try to put as much useful information in as I can. Alright, that's about it. This stuff's getting too tacky to work with. Luckily, I pretty much used all of it up, so got my styrofoam head here I use to store this thing on while it's curing. There we go. So if you do use the cold cast powder, like I said, you need to be wearing breath protection of some kind. The stuff can cause serious damage. at least a dust mask, if not a respirator. Like I said, normally I do wear a respirator for this. Now, nice thing is that unlike most resins, this stuff doesn't get you high if you're not wearing breath protection. That doesn't mean you shouldn't, though. Like I said, I do tend to get little headaches. Today I seem to be alright, but I got the garage door open and lots of ventilation, so hopefully I'll be good. Alright, let's let that cure.